What is the gurus or the Buddhists say, life is a journey. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. So
The
yeah,
journey. Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
always keep moving.
I
Yeah,
am.
buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
There's and I also there is science is not the end. It's just a path.
Right.
Okay. There is no end.
No, no. There's no such thing as perfect either. It's
Right.
we
Right.
just levels of perfection, I guess, at that
Mm.
point. It's and that's something we've come to discover. Like I said, even this path was like the first round of test. It never occurred to me why we were getting some of the results that we were getting. And especially the dual frequencies and things like that, not realizing, and it was frustrating because it didn't matter what the device was, we kept getting this 50 hertz spike, and it was like, and so finally, when I did the second round, a month 2 months ago with Ron, I said, we got to get out of the corners, and let's test the corner traps where we don't have any back, because I had suspicions. I think I've told you before, I had suspicions that that gap in the back was creating an alternate pressure. And sure enough, just it did. That's what it was. And once we figured that out, then it was okay, now how do we do this? And then we had to figure out the spacings and things like that really kind of took us to the path. Okay, here, now we have some coherent information. And it was amazing. What was really amazing about it is the more we spaced them apart, the more we were looking at the individual units, the more efficient the test was. And, which would seem counterintuitive. You would think that they would actually work better coupled together, but it doesn't, because in diaphragmatic, the sympathetic nature of them together is both a positive and a negative, and but more of a negative, in my opinion.
Does that have something to do with the wavelength we're dealing with? These wavelengths are very long, and you get into a portion of it as it's traveling, as it hits the wall, but it also travels along the wall as well.
Right.
So it will have an interference pattern there between two. So if these are operating fine here and here, move them closer together, I can see how that would interfere.
Well, and it's like,
could be I could be wrong about that.
I mean, it's interesting to look at the whole dynamic of it, because one of the reasons them being close together was a problem. I mean, these things have huge edges. I mean, we talk about edge effect when we're testing
Right.
panels, in a regular diffuse environment, in a mount or something like that. Edge effect in these is phenomenal when you start getting them close to each other. That's why we finally came up with, okay, we need to separate them by at least a meter apart, so that edge effect no longer is an issue. And it may still be in a little bit, but not significant. And so you have edge effects, you have back effects, you have all these different things that are taking place. And and like I said, once we got past that 50 hertz, that backspace that Ron has in his lab because of the conduit, then I kind of opened up our eyes to saying, oh, there's all these interferences that are affecting the test. Let's test these separated on the walls. And I used the corner modules, which I think I told you, because I knew they wouldn't have any back. And sure enough, that's when we started coming up with a coherent. And I showed that in this presentation. It's that's when we came up with a coherent test. It wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better. They were still too close together. We ultimately separated them apart a little bit, but it made all the difference in the world. And once we figured that out, then it just opened up our eyes to, okay, here's what we need to do. But it was an expensive and time consuming process to get there, but well worth it. Now, it's like, now I can do anything I want with low frequency.
It's interesting because you see, this kind of testing is not in any standards.
No,
they have to be written for this, and that's probably why Ryan kept going back to the corner. That's where you're supposed to test them. That's where the rules say. But the rules
are
are
wrong.
by, they're wrong.
Well, It's interesting because I'm in the process, we have a lab and I'm in the process of requalifying the lab, and a lot of it's based on this. And it's the other thing it's based on is these LFRCs, the diffusers I've started making for reverb chambers specifically for that purpose. And so now I'm going to start using them in mine because I need more diffusion in my lab. I am curious and almost a little concerned about how the diffusion might affect the low frequency zones, the modal zones. I don't know, that's so there's all kinds of, that's why I'm requalifying everything, because there's all kinds of things that will happen. I need the diffusion in order to have the diffuse area, the normal, A mounts and J mounts, all that kind of stuff. I need it for that purpose. But now, how is it going to affect? I'm going to test low frequency before I put in the diffusion and test the modal zones, and then I'm going to test them afterwards and see how it works. Because the one thing is, what's interesting about this to me as I look at it, and you'll see this in the presentation, the modal zones in my lab, my overlapping frequencies, my lowest one, my Schroeder frequency is 41 hertz. Which should mean that I can test anything down to, basically 41 hertz in low frequency in the modal zones. I don't think that, and my lab's not particularly small. I'm probably the second or third largest one in the US, but I'm at 281 cubic meters, which is slightly about the same as Riverbank is. And then, Ron's obviously is huge, and, he's got a whole different animal in the lab. But it's going to be interesting to see if because I know Riverbank has done testing. I was looking at some of Eric's test, one specifically that he did for GIK, where he made some of the same mistakes that we made early on, putting them too close together and things like that. But again, he didn't know, this is all we have. So and I know Ron has talked to him about that. I'm going to talk to him at the next ASTM meeting, because he's over the committee, and it's like, we need to present this as an addendum to C423 so that it becomes a standard that people can use and be able to do this. But they're going to have to look at their labs, and they're going to, the nice thing about modal frequencies is they're easy to assess. I know when Jerry Lilly did mine, I have all the charts as to what, the overlapping frequencies and stuff are, so it was easy to look at and figure out, because it's all size based. So size and the nature of the size and length and width and height of the room. So it's it's fun. It's fun to go through all this stuff to really kind of say, hey, we're going to make an improvement in the industry. We're going to make an improvement in how people do things. And get finally some honest, because it's been annoying as heck to me, because even my first designs which were based on the Fraunhofer designs, I just copied it. I mean, I'm not proud, I'll admit it, but I copied it.
We all copy. No, that's what we do. It's fine. For years and years, I copied designers that I considered my mentors, and and you go with it. And Absolutely. Then later on you test out and you find out, that doesn't work like we thought it did.
No, and that's the whole thing, is that we start to look at, and I know Fraunhofer is all impedance tube testing, right? So it's also one of the things that's led me to say I will never test in an impedance tube. I don't care how large it is. It's too confined an environment. It does not react like a room. And that's why a reverb chamber makes sense. We just have to test in the right part of the reverb chamber. So, and that's, because these things are never mounted in a diffuse field. They're always mounted in a modal field. So, it just, all of these things, some of it was just common sense. And the other parts were like, okay, we'll have to experiment with it and see what works best. Okay, understanding diaphragmatic traps, bass traps, and testing. I entitled it this because this is a basic understanding of how diaphragmatic bass trap works and how we test it now based on what has happened in the past, which has not been exactly wonderful, and we'll go through that and talk about it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the different types of base traps, because it's important to note that this testing doesn't necessarily apply to everything. Broadband base traps, as you well know, thick fiberglass, mineral wool panels, things like that, used for broadband use. And it's not just for low frequencies, but it's usually to extend a panel to low frequency spectrums. We all know about 4-inch panels, 6-inch panels, things like that. That's common. This really isn't dealing with that. Helmholtz. This is a possibility to be used for Helmholtz as well, because for those who don't know what Helmholtz is, it's holes typically in wood plates tuned by size and spacing. It's a theory that's been around for literally hundreds of years, and was used by the Romans back in the day. So that's a whole nother animal. Composite traps. This probably can't be used for those either, although it potentially the low frequency performance of a composite could technically be used. These are typically fiberglass or mineral wool with assorted films and substrates in between them to, again, extend low frequency response. What we are talking about here is diaphragmatic, and a diaphragmatic base trap, as you know, but many may not, is one that has a stiff front plate and interior spring treatments to adjust for frequencies, which is also based on depth, width, height. All kinds of different calculations go into diaphragmatic base traps to make them perform at the various frequencies that we want them to perform at. So ASTM C423 and ISO 354 are the two standards in the world for testing absorption of acoustic products. Unfortunately, these do not address anything below 100 hertz. In fact, C423 is technically supposed to be between 125 and 4K, which really goes back to the old telephone days and why why we are so limited. But it's because we're testing in a diffuse field. Everything about C423, of which I'm on the committee for that, and for the E33 committee for the United States, is all about the diffuse field and creating a diffuse field in the middle of a room. Again, as we were talking about, I don't like impedance tube testing. I don't trust it. It can probably be trusted maybe above 150 hertz to some extent, but for low frequency, I just don't believe it can be trusted. Right. That's a personal thing, and there will be those who would disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. So it's about understanding modal zones. So everybody understands, for the most part, that when we talk about low frequencies, we're talking about modes and how to control the modes in a room. So as an example, we did a modal visual of my lab, our lab here at Real Acoustics. And this is at the various frequencies. These are technically the overlapping frequencies of the design nature of the lab. So you can see we've got 20, 30, 41, 43, 60, and 62. I just picked these out as examples to show what can happen, how the changes in the modes in a room happen depending on frequency. So if you look at number 1 in the upper left-hand corner, that's 20 hertz. And you can see the red represents a lot of effectiveness or efficiency in that frequency. It's all against the walls. And, as you move up, it can change pretty dramatically depending on the frequency. As you go up to 30, you see it becomes less efficient in the middle, but still very efficient in the corners of the room. Same thing with 41. Now it floats back to being on the walls. The walls are typically always going to be the most modal spots in there, and if you look at look at 41, you look at mode 4 versus mode 5, and you look at the way that it switches, with only a 2 hertz difference, it'll switch back and forth. You can't control what it's going to do, but the important thing to note is if you look at the middle of the floor on all of these, the most you might see is some modal response in those frequencies in stripes or in small zones of the floor, but they're always going to be against the walls. And this is what led us to really saying, okay, we need to test, since these devices in situ are installed on walls and corners. That's where we need to be testing it, because that's where the modes are. In a reverberation chamber, we specifically, for instance, the C423 standard, it specifically states you cannot test any products beyond 0.75 meters from the wall. And in the case of our lab, it's 1 meter from the wall. And because you can't create a diffuse zone that close to the walls, so we come out. So just the opposite applies for testing low frequency. We want to be in the modal zones, not in the diffuse field, because the diffuse field doesn't give us appropriate information, as you will see. So this is an experiment we ran with our 3248 model, which is 32 inches by 48 inches. And this particular model is, I think, was the 8-inch thick model. So and this is an A mount, a typical A mount test. And you can see that they are in the diffuse field of the lab. They're all mounted close together. In this case, I'll say it's too close together, because now we get sympathetic response from these. An example of this, I always like to point out, there's a manufacturer that builds a 2x2 device. And they tested 18 of them put together in an A mount like this. And they make a claim that the device can go down to 40 hertz. Well, first thing is that, the waveform is way too large for a 1 or even 2 2x2 devices to have any efficacy at 40 hertz. Just can't happen. It's logic that those waveforms are too big. But also, by testing them all together, you would get some sympathetic response. And it wasn't very efficient. I think it was like a 0.6 NRC or something like that. But it's misinformation, and that's the thing we're trying to get rid of is bad information. So the other factor that comes in is you get edge diffraction. As we can see here, there's big edges in this particular model, and it creates a really interesting response. So this is what that test looked like. So the 63 hertz is correct. That is actually the center frequency. It's at a 1, which, but it's really, really narrow. It's a very narrow response. Yeah. The other thing is you come up with this interesting 40 hertz at about 0.55, which technically shouldn't be there. Whether that was caused by the edge effect or whether it was caused by the mounting, or who knows what, it's really hard to say. Or it could be the coupling effect of all of them together as well. But that shouldn't be there. That's just an anomaly. And there's a lot of different things that you look at, even that slight slope up, which is not that slight. When you get a 10K, it's at a 0.5. We know the base trap is not doing that. It's right. So all of these things led us to go, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be some more coherent information in ways we do this. So we started to test against the walls, and we take this happens to be the 5-inch model of the Basemont 4848. And in the first test that we did, when we started to test against the wall and the modal zones, we start to see that it's performing a little bit differently. Now, obviously, this is a thinner unit, and again, the thickness can make a difference in the center frequency, which is really what where we concentrate on. But also, we see this 80 hertz bump. We see 2 bumps. There should not be 2 bumps in a diaphragmatic absorber, and not to mention the third bump at a 0.5 at 40. All of these things, start to make us go, well, why are we getting all this, weird information out of these things? Again, what we found ultimately is that the units were too close together. Again, causing edge diffraction, which will cause, it could be a cause of either the 40 or the 80 there. The units are not flush to the wall because of that 3/4 inch conduit behind them. We couldn't go flush like that. and that creates a different pressure behind the unit. And then they're, again, too close to the corners. We found being too close to the corners also made a difference in the performance and how they reacted. So what we started to do is we began, I took them and I said, we got to tilt these. So we get rid of the back pressure behind it, because now it's an open space behind them. We're still well in the modal zone, so it's not a problem. And by doing this, now all of a sudden, I mean, we start looking at, okay, here's the performance, and we separated them by more than 1 meter apiece. And that made a world of difference. And it's really interesting because you would think that being closer together would actually increase the performance of the units. It did not. What it did was it actually created a test data that shows us what the individual units are doing by themselves, which actually makes them more efficient. And and very few people use base traps coupled together. Once in a while here and there that you might see that, but base traps are typically, you put one in one corner, one in another corner on a wall, on either the separated, one left, one right, that kind of thing, because that's appropriate. That's where they should be. And so we find out, all of a sudden that, when we do this testing properly, now we start to show what the efficiencies really are. And it gets, it really reduced the upper frequency issues, which again, I think were caused by diffraction, practically eliminate anything below the center frequency. It was really a, eye-opening experience for us to be able to really now see how these units can perform individually when tested properly.
Yeah.
So, this is the one I was telling you about, that the base mod 2448 was the first model where where it came up with that left result that you see there. This is them mounted together in the corner, which is a very weird response. It's we wish we could create ones that could have that kind. If we could control that and say, okay, I want to get 50 hertz and I want to get 80 hertz and I want all that would be it'd be
right.
Nice, except those big dips are it'd be great for somebody that had that problem, but it's disingenuous, doesn't really work. So when we separated them out, now all of a sudden we have much better efficiency, still a slight bump in the 0.5. And again, I think that was simply because we had them too close together. We hadn't separated them by that 1 meter yet. And, but once we do, and you can see in subsequent tests, once we figured out that we needed to keep them more separated, this is really close to accurate, that right hand. But once we just needed to separate them a little bit more so that we didn't get the diffraction effects. So now when, this is more like it. So when we get to the 3248 8-inch, which you saw earlier in that A mount testing, which was only at a 1 at best, and then had that 40 hertz spike and things like that. Right. Now look what it does when mounted properly. Yeah, that's phenomenal.
Sweet.
Yeah,
that's what that's what you're looking for. Yeah,
and that's what we're looking for. And again, my whole perspective on testing and creating base traps is it's surgical. I'm not looking to make something that goes out to 5K or something. This is about being able to create under 125 hertz, being able to create a device that I can tune anywhere you want to, anything, any place that you want it to be, from 40 hertz all the way up, even below 40 if we wanted to, although they get awfully big when we do that. But, from 40 hertz to 125, we can literally create any frequency that we want to now. We've tested that many devices and that many different spectrums and sizes. And the other thing is size. From a pragmatic standpoint, not every room can hold a 4848 or 4896, for instance, things like that. It's really important to note that we have a lot of different sizes so that they can fit into the environment, including corner modules and things like that. And it's, and we can adjust to a certain extent. We can adjust the frequency spectrum and figure out here's what we need to do in order to get there. And it's so that's really, it's been the thing. And the other thing was to create both narrow and broadband. For instance, this one that you see here is a narrow band. So, and we get a lot of customers say, I've got real issues at 63. So here we go. The base mod 3248 will, take 63 and just basically kill it. So, which is, what you're looking for. But then if we want to do a broader module, we have that capability as well through some other creative methodologies that we've used in the design of the units, that allows us, in this case, to go from 50 to 100 with quite a bit of efficacy. You're looking at 1.5 and up to 100 at 1.33. So that's beyond anything that we've ever seen before. And and I think that anybody else can offer. It's really having a capacity, and then having it drop off quickly. As you can see, it's down to a 0.3 at 200 hertz. So it's really not dealing with anything in the other ranges that typical panels, fabric wrap panels, things like that, can handle. So, that's and that was the goal. That's been the goal for the last 3 years that we worked on this. So the some important notes to make, and this isn't for you necessarily, John, as it is for the person who may not be as attuned or as educated in this work. These experiments were conducted to create a proper method for testing diaphragmatic bass traps. And again, like I said, I think the only other one that could be tested this way, but time will tell, we'll see, is probably Helmholtz bass traps, because they're going to work on somewhat the same principles and pressures. The idea here is, especially since we're on Ron and I are both on the ASTM C423 committee, is to be able to present some cogent information as to including this as an addendum to C423 for testing low frequencies.
Need to get these things pushed through. I hope that Ron can finish his papers and get them published there, get it accepted. It just takes a long time.
Yeah, I think it's a slow process. I'm hoping that we have enough information, because I'm going to be doing a paper on it as well, and presenting this information. I think we have enough information here to not make it too difficult for them to say, yeah, let's move forward on this, because otherwise they'll continue to test in the wrong way, and that I don't think they want that either. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of commitments we can get from the committee, and we'll be presenting it at this next meeting. So anyway, that's the end of that presentation. I hope that that helped somewhat to make clear what we were doing and how we got to where we were.
Whoever watches this, I want them to go to your website and look at your papers. They're extremely helpful in understanding acoustics, and people should. I think link to your page in my Facebook group.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, welcome. No, it's good. I stand by good products that are fact-based.
Yeah.
So we all make mistakes and and errors and stuff, but it's the continual improvement that's where it counts, right there. We gotta. Anyway,
well, I think it's the desire to improve. It's like to improve. And it's like like you. I mean, we all start off looking at things and assuming that this is good. This is good information, or this is a good product because this, or because somebody else said it was a good product. And Ron and I have one agreement, and that's you don't believe anything until it's tested and tested properly. So
right.
and as I always say, there's a reason I named the company Real Acoustics. You know, it's because I hate misinformation. I just don't
Yeah,
like it.
you and me both. We're in the same team here.
Yeah,
Um, I get posts by folks always asking this and that and the other. What about this idea? I've got an idea for this, and I said, build it and get it tested.
right. Yeah.
You know, that's it. Just get it tested, and then we'll know. We can speculate and assume this and that and talk about it and waste our time. Honestly, it's just
Yeah.
to me, it's wasting my time speculating. I don't like to do that.
And it's interesting to me. I mean, after all these years of doing this, and I've been doing this a long time now, but it's interesting to me how much we assume certain facts not in evidence, and things that seem logical to us in terms of how something should perform rarely do. You know, it's really, you know,
Yeah.
you know, and so I've had to use my background as a sound engineer, you know, a live sound engineer and a recording engineer, to really think about how frequencies and waveforms perform in rooms, to now take a different look at it. And I'm appreciative. I'm always appreciative of that experience, because it gives me, you know, both in, you know, and live and recording are very different experiences. And but you know, because you're dealing with much larger and bigger waveforms in a live venue than you
Oh
typically in
yeah.
a recording. And so, you know, I've brought that experience in. But even then, you know, I will assume something, test it out, and go, okay, well, that didn't work. You know, and it's you know, and yet you go back through and you go back and say, okay, so if that didn't work, why didn't it work? And that's really what this has been all about. It's been, you know, it's like, okay, if that didn't work, and again, sometimes based on previous information from other manufacturers, or from, you know, papers you read, things like that. You know, it's the same thing, you know, with diffusion. For me, it's, you know, that's where I really started all of this 15 years ago, was with diffusion, because we had certain things that we thought we understood about how stuff works. And you know, I look back at Schroeder. You know, I mean, Schroeder created the quadratic residue diffuser in 1975. He did not have the equipment in 1975 to look at it the way we can look at it today.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting, you know, as you start to see that. I don't blame anybody for saying, hey, this does that, based on, you know, the best information they had at the time. But now we have better information, you know, and it's wonderful to live in this day and age where we have that kind of testing capability.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. All right, next time we do this, let's discuss diffusers, how they work, why they work, and what their extent is. You know, you
Yeah, and
mentioned the
you know,
last time we talked about
yeah,
that.
and you know, and what we'll talk about is, you know, what I consider a diffuser and what I consider a scatterer, and
Mhm.
and I have some documentation that I think backs that up. And you know, like I said, there's always going to be people that disagree, and that's fine. That's not a problem. But I think Schroeder understood some things that we didn't, and even though he
Mm.
couldn't necessarily show it at the time, we can now. And there's some cool stuff that I want to show you once we get that going. Okay.
I think disagreements can be avoided as long as definitions are made. You know, if you say I define a diffuser this and a scatterer that, you know, we could
And
set something up
yeah,
like
and
that.
I think, you know, we have to understand what the terminologies really mean in
Mm.
science. And you know,
Yes.
once we do that, you know, I mean, like, you know, if you talk about diffusers, for instance, you know, Schroeder was the first one to create a product, such as it was, because that's what Schroeder did. A lot of people don't realize. I mean, he worked for Bell Labs. You know, he was creating products. That's all he did. But when he created this, it was a lark for him. It was, you know, he wanted to, he loved classical music, and he wanted to create a product that would create, you know, diffuse reflections coming out of ceilings. That was why he created
Mm.
the QRD.
Mhm.
And you know, you have to kind of look back into his history and his papers and to understand that. But the you know, what is diffuse, what we consider diffusion. So I always look at what he created as a diffuser, and I'll explain that to you when we get to this next chapter. I'll, you know,
Okay.
look at that. It'll be fun. You know, we'll have some fun with
Sounds
it.
wonderful.